There's a few channels that I do particularly like and I find myself going back to frequently. So Tristan's channel is one of those. I do enjoy his perspective on things. Sometimes he's not 100% spot on, but he really tries, and he does actually try to look things up and try to find correct information, which is more than a lot of people do. So this video is him looking at lies that people overseas have been told about Australia. Let's jump in.
What's good, y'all? Tristan here, and today I'm going to be telling you 8 lies you've been told about Australia. The first lie that I was told about Australia is that things here are expensive. I was made to believe that living in Australia was going to be like the same price as like living in like Nordic countries, like Norway, Sweden, but when it comes down to it, like most things in Australia are about the same price as they would be in the States. I feel a little bit bad because I feel like this is a lie I've kind of helped contribute to by some things that I've said on this channel. I've mentioned a lot how alcohol is more expensive here. There are a couple of very specific things like alcohol and tobacco that are so much more expensive here. Like yes, it's like 2 to 3 times the price to buy alcohol and tobacco here in Australia.
That is so true, because here in Australia, the government will tax something, and then when they need more money, they'll add another tax to that exact same item. So cigarettes and alcohol are just taxed up the wazoo, same with fuel. Now, I actually, several months back, had to jump in and ask one of my American friends, is this true? Now, I'm a non-smoker, so I don't know what the current price for cigarettes is, but I gather that like a pack of 50 cigarettes is going to be well and truly upwards of $50-$60 here in Australia. And I was listening to a live stream several months back where someone was talking about needing $5 to buy a packet of cigarettes. And I was like, what? $5 for a packet of cigarettes? It was either $5 or $10. And I thought, what would you get for that? Like 2 cigarettes wrapped up in a little placky bag? And I asked my American friends, and they're like, no, that's actually a packet of cigarettes, 20 or 30 cigarettes in the pack. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding. So he's spot on there, but I'm guessing he's possibly also a non-smoker and doesn't realise the huge difference in costs there. And I've heard so many people talk about the difference in the cost of alcohol, and that too is just phenomenal.
But aside from that, really the only other things that are like maybe a little bit more expensive here is I would say fast food might be slightly more expensive and gas is a little bit more expensive here. But when it really comes down to it, like things are about the same price for the most part, give or take a little bit, like food's about the same price. I would actually say I can think of more things that are cheaper here than in America. For example, healthcare, cell phone service. From what I've noticed when shopping at stores here, I think clothing has been a little bit cheaper here in Australia.
I've heard it said that the difference comes down to whether you're travelling or whether you're living here. So if you're travelling here, then you are going to be faced with the slightly more expensive takeaway food, the higher cost of fuel, the higher cost of alcohol, the higher cost of cigarettes if you need to buy cigarettes here. But if you are living here, I've heard people say that over time, it actually ends up becoming cheaper living in Australia because of the benefits like healthcare. So once you are eligible for Medicare and stuff like that, it's actually long term, it turns out to be actually better off economically for someone to be living in Australia because of those additional benefits. And of course also here in Australia we have better wages, so while perhaps our things do seem a little bit more expensive, it'd be interesting to know in terms of wages versus cost of living.
The second lie that I was told about Australia, it's kind of hard to put into words, but it's like that kangaroos are like some sort of like special, cool, unique animal. Yes, kangaroos are unique to Australia. I don't think they're in any other country. And yes, they are the national animal of Australia. That being said, there's just not really a lot of hype around them like we think there is in the States. I would compare kangaroos here to like our deer in America. You can like hunt them and eat them, like their meat will be offered for sale like at grocery stores here. You'll often just like see them dead laying on the side of the road because they've like been hit by cars. And funny enough, they're actually considered pests in a lot of places in Australia. They're all over the place, like maybe not in like the cities, but like in general, they're all over Australia. I think there's like 60 million of them here or something like that. They just don't have this like cool X factor to them here in Australia. Like koalas here in Australia, Australians think koalas are cool. Like they are like kept in sanctuaries and they like take care of them, and I mean they are kind of like a dying species, but they're definitely treated with like a higher level of like care than like most animals. And I don't know, that's kind of how I thought kangaroos were here when coming here, but no, in reality like kangaroos are just like, it's like a squirrel, like a deer. It's just another animal that's there. They don't like, I don't know how to say. I don't want to say they don't value them, but like they don't have a, like they're not elevated to a higher level than most animals.
Well, how to unpack that? Yeah, sure, we don't have the same sort of feelings that we do for koalas and wombats, etc. But it's not that we don't value them, it's just that they are far more common. So to see a wombat out in the wild or a koala out in the wild is something pretty special. When it comes to kangaroos, there is actually more kangaroos in Australia than there are people. So obviously at some point they do become a little bit more commonplace, and people do tend to take them for granted. It's not that we don't love kangaroos, it's just that they're not as special as koalas and stuff because you can see them anywhere. And yeah, sure, you see a lot of kangaroos on the side of the road, but that's not because we don't like them. That's because of the huge population of kangaroos. And face it, kangaroos are twits. They have no road sense whatsoever. So it's so much easier for kangaroos to end up dead on the side of the road because they just don't look where they're going. As for comparing them to squirrels and deer in the US, I don't have a comment on that because I don't know what Americans truly think about squirrels and deers and stuff. I have some American friends who absolutely adore squirrels, but at the same time, I've not heard people talk about deer very often, other than when they've ended up hitting a deer with a car. And calling kangaroos pests? Yes, for some farmers, kangaroos can be considered pests because they get into crops and they will eat crops. But the majority of the Australian population don't think of them as pests. Unless, of course, you've got a massive insurance bill where a kangaroo is taken out the front of your car.
Speaking of kangaroos, number 3, I did not want to put this on the list. Like I could not imagine this being a lie that people actually believe about Australia, but like every Australian I've talked to seems to have been asked this by a foreigner, and that is, no, they do not ride kangaroos here in Australia. Who the thinks this? I don't know. Like, first of all, they're not that big. Second of all, where would you ride? Like, what, would you sit on it like this? Like, would you like stand vertically on its back? Like how would you ride a kangaroo? And third, they don't walk, they like hop. Could you imagine how uncomfortable a ride on a kangaroo would be if you're hopping everywhere? I am from Texas. I have been asked a couple dozen times if I ride a horse to school. I think that is a stupid, dumb thing, that misconception people would have. But that at least makes like a little bit of sense, because like it is possible to ride a horse. Like a kangaroo, come on guys.
I love the visuals he gives you while he's talking about it. I love that he just has to make more fun of such a ridiculous claim. I thought it was pretty great. And I do have to wonder, do Americans truly believe that Australians ride kangaroos? Or is it just one of those jokes that has persevered? Or is it something that has originated from your typical Aussie larrikin and it's just gone way beyond a joke? Because face it, in Australia we do have a pretty dry humour, and I can imagine Australians going to America and being asked, well, you know, do you have a pet kangaroo? And people would be like, oh yeah, I ride it to and from work. Because that's just how our humour is, and perhaps that's how it all started. Who knows?
The fourth lie that you've been told about Australia is you've been lied to about what are some of the famous Aussie sayings. So one is Dingo ate my baby. I've never heard anyone say that.
You've probably heard me rant about that in a previous video. That just makes my blood boil. And these days you don't hear Australians saying that because most people respect the fact that that is a phrase that was made up by Australian media to mock a woman whose child had been taken by a dingo because it was a trial by media. The impression that people were meant to get was that Lindy Chamberlain was responsible for the death of her child and that it was just a big lie about the dingo. So, yeah, no, you will never hear people say that in Australia unless they are really uncouth individuals who don't understand the fact that it is making fun of a horrible, horrible situation. Sadly, there are a lot of Americans who don't understand the situation and who still think it's funny because they don't really know what they're saying.
The second one is crikey. All respect to Steve Irwin. I think he kind of like made that famous, and like, I'm not saying I maybe have heard it like once here, but it's not something you hear like everyday Australians say.
No respect to Steve Irwin, but his whole persona was all about the marketing. Terry Irwin was an American, married to an Australian guy. The whole crocodile guy thing was marketed to an American audience. So they had to come up with a catchphrase, and the catchphrase was crikey. I had never heard that being used by anyone before Steve Irwin came along. And I'm pretty certain I've never heard it being used since.
3 is shrimp on the barbie. No one actually says that. They don't even call shrimp here, they call them prawns. So if they were to say that, it would be prawn on the barbie, but yeah, they don't even really say that much.
Come on, Tristan, be honest. The whole time that you were in Australia, did you ever hear an Australian talk about chucking a shrimp on the barbie or a prawn on the barbie? No, because if we have a barbecue, we just talk about we're going to have a barbie. We're going to have a barbecue. We don't ever go like, oh, let's go chuck a shrimp on the barbie or a prawn on the barbie.
And the fourth Aussie saying that they don't actually really say here that much is good day, mate. Like, that is probably the most stereotypical Aussie saying, and good day, they say mate. If you want to talk like an Aussie, yeah, say mate. They say that all the time. But good day, yes, they do say it here. I've heard it. Like, it's not like they never say good day. But when they're walking down the street and they see a friend, they don't say good day, mate. They just say like, hey, mate, what's up, mate? How you doing, mate? Like, they don't say good day. Yes, they use it, but by no means is it the most common way to say hello.
Yeah, you still come across people who use g'day, and it's not completely uncommon, but I think what happened was it became such a stereotypical thing that Australians started shying away from using g'day, and I think we can thank Hogs for that.
The fifth lie that you've been told about Australia is that Foster's beer is a famous Australian beer. At one point, like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, apparently it was a fairly common beer here. But in today's day and age, nobody drinks it. If you want like an actual common Australian beer, get like a Great Northern or a VB.
Come on, seriously, when did anyone ever drink Foster's beer? That's a joke. Now, I'm just going to point out that the beers he's looking at there are Northerner beers. They're what you're likely to see Queensland and probably New South Wales. I had a friend from New South Wales who used to live in Tassie, and her favourite beer was VB. But in Tassie, most people drink Cascade. So I'm curious. Leave a comment below saying what state you live in and what is the popular brand of beer in your state.
Alright, my sixth lie that you've been told about Australia is that everyone here in Australia surfs. Let me explain this a little because there's a lot of truth to this, but also a lot of lie to this. So I'm going to start this off with some statistics. So, 2.5 million people, that's about 10% of Australia, are recreational surfers. That's just based on Wikipedia, but I don't know, we'll trust it. That same website also said that only 420,000 people participated in surfing annually. That's closer to 2% of the Australian population, so much lower. Let me give you my take on it. yes, a lot of people in Australia do surf, but it's not nearly as many people as I was expecting when I came over here. So first, I was in Victoria. Victoria, like most of the population, is in Melbourne. Melbourne is in a bay, so there's not really many waves there at all. Like the waves are like this big there, so you can't surf. If you do want to surf, you have to drive about an hour and a half to 2 hours like around to get outside of the bay. So do people surf there? Yes, but it's not like, oh, go finish work and then go, catch some waves. It's like, no, you need to make like a weekend, like a big trip out of it where you like drive like 2 hours if you want to surf. Then I went to Tasmania. Tons of amazing, great surfing places in Tasmania. That being said, it's freaking cold as heck down there. When I was there, I just didn't happen to see many surfers.
While it's not huge, there is definitely a surfing culture down in Tasmania. And of course you have those areas where it is more popular than other areas. So people on the east coast, there's a lot of people who live on the east coast who like to surf. And you have your surf clubs in various areas in Tasmania. But also Tasmanians are pretty hardy individuals, and they're not going to let the cold stop them if they enjoy surfing. People I know in Tassie who surf have a wetsuit. Keeps them warm and means that they can surf for most of the year. But that said, he is right. It's only a very small percentage of the population in Tasmania who do surf.
Then I went up to Cairns, was there for 3 months, and then I traveled down the east coast of Queensland. It's like a huge state, a lot of coastline. The whole like northern like 2/3 of Queensland, you can't surf in because that's where the Great Barrier Reef is at, and so that kills all the waves, so there's just not good surf. And then there's also like jellyfish and crocodiles and all that, so you don't surf there. Then if you go to the Northern Territory, same thing, there's like crocodiles and jellyfish, and there's just not many good waves in the Northern Territory, so no one surfs there. If you're in Canberra, that's a landlocked place, so you can't really surf in Canberra. Then if you go to Western Australia, there's a bunch of good surf there, but no one lives in Western Australia besides Perth.
So I had wondered if this was a generalisation on his part, but I looked it up, and the population of Western Australia is 2.7 million, probably a bit over that now, and 80% of the population of Western Australia live in Perth. So he's actually pretty accurate there, but I'd imagine that there would still have to be a fairly large surf culture in Western Australia, and I'd love to know if anyone who is listening is from Western Australia or has been there and can clarify that. But you look at some of the stunning beaches that exist over there, and surely there has to be a somewhat robust surf culture.
So yes, you can surf, but no one's out there. Then you get to where I'm at now, and this is the southern third of Queensland. Southern third of Queensland, Noosa was the first big like surfer town that I had seen in Australia, and I was just there like 2 weeks ago. Now I'm in a place called Surfers Paradise. Obviously, great waves, great place to surf, total surfer vibes. This is what I expected all of Australia was going to be like when I came here. You go a little bit south of here, New South Wales, you go to Byron Bay, like tons of great surf in New South Wales. That being said, I don't want to take anything away from the like beaches and the surfing culture here, because they have sick beaches here, whether you can surf at them or not. Like the surfing culture here is awesome. I guess I just say it took me a while to find that real surfer vibe here in Australia.
So essentially what he's saying is that the surf culture is a regional thing. It depends on where you live as to whether or not there is a huge surf culture. And there are so many areas in Australia where there isn't much of a surf culture. And I think he's probably made a pretty good representation of this. And the point he's made is that no, not every Australian does surf, and perhaps the majority of us don't.
The seventh lie that you've been told about Australia is that driving on the other side of the road, driving on the left side, is hard. You think it might be like hard or something, but really you just like follow the lanes and it's like super easy learning how to drive on the left side of the road. Like you get in a car, you drive for like 10 minutes max, and like you've totally adjusted and it's good. I've not met a single person who thought it was difficult or had a hard time with it. That being said, one thing that you will find maybe surprisingly hard or difficult is how to walk on the left side of the road, or how to walk on the left side. This was something I was not expecting to be difficult, but you're just so used to like when you're like running into someone on the sidewalk, stepping to the right, or you're about to cross the road and you look right for a car when you're supposed to look left, or vice versa. The driving, super easy to adjust to. The walking, like as silly as it sounds, it's a little bit harder to adjust to that.
So I recall hearing someone who had come from America saying that they very nearly got run over here in Australia because they looked the wrong way before attempting to cross the road. So I think it is a thing that while it is easier to adjust to driving in Australia, that as a pedestrian, it's so ingrained in your mind that it is perhaps a little bit more challenging. So flipping it, I'd be curious to know from anyone who has driven overseas where you drive on the right side of the road, how you've experienced that.
The eighth and final lie that you've been told about Australia is that the toilets here flush the other way. I know in science class when you were like 7, 8 years old, they told you how in the southern hemisphere, like, water naturally spins the other way. The example they gave you were toilets in Australia. Everyone thinks, oh, toilets in Australia flush the other way. Well, I hate to tell you, but this is totally false. This is a complete lie. Yes, maybe scientifically they're supposed to spin the other way, but the reality is toilets here just don't spin at all. So I talked in another video, like, this is what an American toilet looks like, and this is what an Australian toilet looks like. They have way less water in them, so while our toilets do like a long, like, spinning slow flush that sucks down, the toilets here just do a quick, like, suck down, no spinning at all. Like, I've been here for a while, I've traveled a lot, probably used over 100 toilets. I'm telling you, I look every time, and nope, not a single one has spun.
Presumably he means he's used over 100 different toilets, and he's not trying to tell us that he has some serious medical issues here. We definitely do have The Simpsons to thank for that stereotype that is now ingrained in everyone's psyche. So I think Tristan has done a really good job of explaining things in this video. There's very little that I would disagree with when it comes to what he's said, just where perhaps my interpretation may be slightly different. But overall, I find that he certainly did get a pretty good grasp of Australia while he was here. So thanks for listening. If you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button or hit the like button and leave a comment below.